First thing that we're going to talk about today is how to utilize the different types of tracks and how to use them to their full potential. Let's take a look at the mix window, and that way we can get a better idea as to the different types of tracks that we're using in this session. Tracks 1 through 6 are audio tracks. Tracks 7 and 8 are instrument tracks. 9 and 10 are both our auxiliary input tracks. We have our master fader, and then 12 through 14 are our MIDI tracks. Now let's start out by talking about the different tracks and exactly how I'm using them in this session. The first track is my click track. Whenever I open up a session, that's the very first thing that I do is I create a click track. If you look up at the insert selector, you can see that I don't have the click plugin added. And the reason that is because earlier what I did is I physically printed the click track to my audio track. The other thing that you can see is the track's waveform is completely grayed out. So if I go to the beginning of the track, I hit play, you can see that there's nothing coming out. There's not even a signal. The reason that is because I've taken the voice off of this track. And what that means is that instead of muting it, I click on the track with my cursor, and then on the keyboard, I hit Command M, or for a PC, it's Control M. And you can see that when I do that, the voice on the track is now enabled. And when I hit play, the click starts playing. Now if you just hit the mute button, you can see that there is still a signal going through this track. But the moment that you type Command M or Control M on a PC, the voice of the track is now gone. So the next thing, let's go to the beginning of this waveform, and let's look at these next two tracks, AC1 and AC1D. They're both the same exact guitar track. The only difference is that I recorded them both a different way. The first one I recorded with a condenser microphone, and the second one I recorded direct. And what I've done with the track is I actually panned one hard left and I panned the other one hard right to give the guitar a stereo effect. So let's listen to these tracks together. Let me take off the reverb, and then afterwards we can talk about that. Now when I undo these mutes, you can hear the reverb working. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how I have the reverb set up. So on the send selector for my tracks, what I've done is I've selected a bus that I've specified to carry reverb to any track that I want from an auxiliary input track. One thing that I've seen a lot of people do is they use a different reverb, a different delay on every single audio track that they have. The thing is that when you use an auxiliary input, you can use one reverb and route it to 10, 15, 20, however many tracks you want to, and you're only using one reverb. So let's take a look at the auxiliary input tracks to give you a general overview as to what exactly is going on here. If you take a look at the input of both of the tracks, I've changed them both to buses that I've specified as verb 1 and verb 2. After I've changed the input to a bus, I'm going to click on the send selector for whatever track I want to route it to, and I'm going to select that same bus that I specified. And as you can see, I selected the same reverb, I selected the same bus for my first two tracks, and then I did the same thing for my next two tracks. We're going to go into a lot more detail in another lesson called adding effects that should be up soon, so check that out and hopefully that'll answer a lot more questions. The other thing that you're probably wondering is how are you using a fader with the send selector, and how did you only select one? The default usually has 5 different slots, but I'm only using one of them. And how you do that is you're going to click on View up on the top menu. You're going to scroll over whichever send you want to use. And for this case, I'm using Send F. And as opposed to clicking on Assignment, which activates all of them, you're only going to select one of them. So that's pretty much what is going on for those first two tracks. So let's look at the other tracks. And I'm using a completely different reverb like we specified. Let's actually just listen to it for a second. And now when I mute it, you can hear that the reverb gives the guitar a completely new dimension. Now let's take a listen to the AC solo. And when I mute the reverb, you can see that it just completely brightens it up and gives it more body. So the next track, which is track 6, is called Sparkle, and if you look all the way on the right side, tracks 13 and 14 are called Sparkle L and Sparkle R, which stands for left and right. And what I did is I routed them through an auxiliary input track, and I recorded it onto my audio track. And the reason that I left the original MIDI tracks over there is because I can easily access them in case I need to use them later on. So you're probably wondering, well, why don't you just use an instrument track? That way you can have the plugin on there, the MIDI is right there. And the thing is that the more plugins that you're using, the more it's going to just stress your system. So as soon as you've finished with your MIDI parts, you've committed to the tone that you want, whatever the sound is, as soon as you've committed to that, I would recommend to just record it directly onto an audio track, and your system is just going to run so much smoother. Look for another lesson called Printing MIDI to an Audio Track, and we're going to go into a lot more detail as to how you would do that. So let's take a look at our edit window, and you can see that where my Sparkle track is, directly below that is the original MIDI files for that track. And you can see that they're grayed out, which again means that I've taken the voice off of the track. And so I'm going to click on it. I'm going to hold Command and press M, or for a PC, it's Control M. So now when I hit play, you can see that the Sparkle track and the MIDI tracks are both playing. The next two tracks are both instrument tracks, and I'm using both of them completely different ways. The first one, I'm using a plugin that is called Expand that comes with Pro Tools. In the next instrument track, I'm using a plugin called Reason Rewire. Reason is a completely different program than Pro Tools, and with the Rewire plugin, I'm able to use any of the instruments that Reason has directly inside of Pro Tools. So when I click on the Reason Rewire plugin, you can see that it says channels 7 through 8. Well, if I go to Reason, and this is my main window, and if I hit the tab button in Reason, it toggles between the front and the back of the rack gear. And if you see right here, I have two cables plugged into input 7 and 8. And if I go down to see what is plugged into that, it's my NNXT. So if I go back to Pro Tools, go to my edit window, and find where the pads start playing, I hit play, I go back to Reason, and if you look at the NNXT, that when the chords are being played, you can see that this note on light continues to go on and off. That says that Pro Tools and Reason are now communicating. So now let's go back to Pro Tools. So we've already talked about our auxiliary input tracks, which is where we're using the reverb. And let's look at our master fader track. The master fader track is very important because when you're finished and you're ready to bounce to disk, you need to make sure that the signal that you have coming out is a strong signal. One of my favorite compressor slash limiters to add to my master fader track to even everything out as well as to boost the signal is either an L2 or an L3 from Waves. So I'm going to click on my insert selector, and I'm going to find the L3. I'm going to add it to my track. And when I hit play, let me just kind of show you what this does. Just keep your eye on the master fader, and you can see that when I move the threshold down, everything starts to even out. Nothing is going to get louder than what I set the ceiling to. No matter how loud it gets, nothing will ever go above that point. You can see that the plugin just makes a huge difference. It brings the level of everything up, and it really just evens out everything. When I bypass it, you can see the difference that it makes. So there you go. There is the master fader. Now let's look at our last couple tracks, which are MIDI tracks that we briefly touched on. And again, the reason that I'm leaving these MIDI tracks over here, the original MIDI tracks, is because later on, if I ever need to change something, I need to add something, if there's anything I need to edit, they're right here. They're in my session. They're not taking up any room. They're not taking up any CPU power, anything. So that concludes our lesson. Let us know if there's anything else that we can put up for you. We hope you guys are learning some valuable information, and have a great day.